Hello, friends. Welcome back. Tonight, we're stepping into the boots of a crusader's life, marching through history, feeling the weight of armor, the heat of the sun, and the stillness of ancient battlefields. It's a slow, immersive journey through what life had been like back then. Before we dive in, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you enjoy these nightly adventures. It really helps the channel grow. Now, get comfy, grab a blanket, some water, or turn on a fan because this is a journey like none other. The sky above Acre was grey with the ash of battle, the sun struggling behind thick smoke to cast its light on the blood-soaked soil. Geoffrey de Beaumont gripped his sword with trembling hands, not from fear, but exhaustion. The weight of iron and expectation bore down on him with equal measure. He was 17, newly knighted, and already knee-deep in the consequences of a life he had no choice in. The clang of steel and cries of the dying filled the air. Geoffrey had dreamed of glory in the Holy Land, but no dream had prepared him for the stench of death or the sound of a Saracen's blade sliding into a comrade's gut. This was not the noble quest sung about by minstrels. This was slaughter, chaotic, frenzied, meaningless. Weeks earlier, he had landed in Outremer with the contingent from Anjou, sunburned, sick from the sea, and filled with pious rage. He had pledged his sword to the Lord, to Christ, to king and country. Yet now he saw none of them in the faces of the slain. The enemy looked just like him, young, afraid, caught in the middle of ideologies born far from the battlefield. He stumbled across the uneven cobbles of the city, past bodies in Crusader mail and Saracen armor, searching for his brother Thomas. They had arrived together. Now Thomas was lost amid the screams and smoke. The year was 1191, and the Third Crusade was in full, ruthless swing. Acre was the prize. Richard the Lionheart himself was rumored to be commanding operations just beyond the city walls. But to Geoffrey, titles and glory meant little now. He needed to find Thomas. He needed water. He needed sleep. But there was none of that. A Crusader knight's life was war without end. From the moment you were old enough to lift a training sword, you were taught one thing: fight for God, die with honor. But Geoffrey had begun to see the cracks. The churchmen, the knights, the nobles, they all preached sacrifice, yet none of them felt it. The real burden fell on the shoulders of the young, the idealistic, the expendable. He passed a chapel that had been converted into a triage center. Inside, priests anointed the dying, their Latin prayers merging with the groans of the wounded. He peeked in, hoping for a glimpse of his brother. Instead, he saw a boy younger than himself, missing both legs, clutching a rosary. The priest looked up. "We have no space. Move along." Geoffrey moved. Outside, a Templar rode past, spattered in gore. The Templars were the elites, the holy warriors who lived by a stricter code, or so they claimed. But Geoffrey had seen one rob a dead merchant the night before. He moved through the city like a ghost, memories of the past weeks clawing at him. The endless sermons, the lice-ridden nights, the thirst, the dysentery, the punishments for minor infractions. One of the squires had been whipped until his back peeled open just for taking an extra crust of bread. This was not chivalry. This was a machine that devoured boys and spit out killers. In the square, soldiers were herding captives. Muslim civilians, men, women, children. Some cried. Some stared blankly. The command came from above. Relocate them, but no one knew where. Geoffrey approached a sergeant. "Have you seen my brother?" Thomas de Beaumont? The man barely looked at him. Dead or dying, like the rest. Move along. Was this fate? To vanish amid the crowd? To become a nameless casualty in a campaign with no clear end? He sat by a well, his body sore, his spirit trained. He thought of home, of forests and meadows, of cool rivers and laughing girls. His mother's voice gentle and lilting, his father's hand stern but guiding. What would they say now, seeing him as he was, hollow-eyed, sun-scorched, clinging to a sword heavier than his soul? A bell rang. Another charge. He rose. Not because he wanted to, but because he must. A Crusader knight did not disobey. To hesitate was to risk the wrath of your superiors. And worse, God himself. He joined the line, his armor chafing, his legs like lead. Beside him stood Henri of Rouen, a lad of 16 who had never held a sword before boarding the ship at Marseille. Henri looked at him, eyes wide. "Do you think we will survive this?" he asked. Geoffrey didn't answer. What could he say? The trumpets blared. They charged. Weeks passed. Acre fell. Victory was declared, but it felt like ash on the tongue. Thousands died, and the surviving Muslims were executed en masse. Geoffrey helped dig the graves. At night, he couldn't sleep. He saw their faces. He smelled the blood. Thomas never turned up. There was no time to mourn. The army pushed on toward Jaffa, then to Arsuf. More battles, more blood. Each stroke claimed as many as the sword. Disease ravaged the camps. Water was rationed. Bread was moldy. Geoffrey learned to harden, to kill without blinking, to push the thoughts away. But they always returned. He began to question the mission. Was this truly holy? Why were they burning villages filled with peasants? Why were Christian knights slaughtering fellow Christians who happened to be Greek or Armenian? He voiced his doubts once to a priest. The man responded by beating him with a wooden cross. "Satan plants doubt," he snarled. "Repent." So Geoffrey learned to keep silent, to nod, to obey. He watched as comrades lost themselves in drink, in looting, in madness. One knight jumped from a tower, raving about angels. Another confessed to strangling a child, then vanished into the desert. Geoffrey wrote letters home, but never received replies. The courier routes were dangerous. Pirates, disease, bandits. He began to forget his native tongue. He dreamed in broken Latin and Arabic. He started to forget Thomas's face. Every town they took, every fortress razed, every shrine defiled, it all added to the ledger of sins he felt piling atop his soul. And still, the church called them righteous. He thought of leaving, fleeing into the wilderness, becoming a hermit, or dying. But knights did not desert. Desertion meant torture, hanging, damnation. He met a leper knight once, a member of the Order of Saint, Lazarus. The man's face was hidden behind bandages, his voice a rasp. "You think you're cursed," the leper said. "You're not cursed until your own flesh rots while you still breathe." Geoffrey had no reply. They marched again. At Arsuf, the Saracens attacked with fury. The sand turned red. Geoffrey lost a finger. His squire died beside him. When the dust settled, the Christians had won, but the price was high. Richard the Lionheart passed him by, shining like the stories said. Yet the king did not look down. He did not see the corpses. He did not know the names. Geoffrey spat blood. He fought on, and so the days blurred into weeks, into months, into years. He became a man not by choice but by attrition. He saw the light die in many eyes. He buried friends. He forgot how to laugh. And somewhere, deep within, a voice kept whispering, "This is not what God wanted." But he could not stop. He was a Crusader knight, and there was no going back. They reached Jerusalem in the winter of 1192, but they would not storm it. Richard had negotiated a treaty with Saladin. Geoffrey heard the news from a dusty, sun-racked herald outside a crumbling church. There would be no final battle, no climactic clash for the holy city, just words, parchment, and a temporary peace. For some, it was a relief. For others, betrayal. Geoffrey felt neither. He was numb. In the months that followed, soldiers were discharged or rerouted. Some returned to Europe. Others stayed in the Levant, carving out territories or joining the orders of knights who had become more like lords than servants of Christ. Geoffrey chose to stay. He didn't know why. Maybe he feared the return journey. Maybe he feared facing his father, who had demanded honor and expected obedience. Maybe he simply didn't know how to be anything else. He joined a minor garrison in Tyre. It was quiet work. Patrolling, drilling, keeping the peace in a city always on the edge of rebellion. He tried to avoid politics, but they found him anyway. Corrupt commanders, local resentment, petty feuds. He started drinking more. One evening, he broke a man's jaw for insulting his dead brother. They tried to court-martial him, but the commander liked him, said Geoffrey had spirit. Besides, the man chuckled, we need killers more than saints. So Geoffrey remained. Then the nightmares began. He dreamed of Acre, of burning mosques, of severed hands, of the boy with no legs. He dreamed of Thomas. Sometimes he thought he saw his brother among the crowds, a face half-turned, a voice distant, but always a ghost. He took to writing journals, not letters. There was no one left to send them to, just pages of memories, confessions, fears. He hid them beneath a loose plank under his cot. He started visiting the chapel again, though not to pray. He just sat, alone. One day, a monk from Genoa asked him, "What troubles you, brother knight?" Geoffrey looked at the altar, God, and the absence of him. The monk said nothing, so Geoffrey left. He kept fighting. Skirmishes, raids, bandits, pirates, always a sword in hand. Years passed. He forgot his age. He stopped counting seasons. He buried his commander, then his replacement, then the next. He took their place, and still, he could not sleep. Geoffrey's leg healed slowly, too slowly for a knight expected to return to the saddle within weeks. Infection nearly claimed him a second time. The sisters of the Order of St. John did what they could with vinegar compresses and blessed water. But the swelling lingered. He walked with a limp now, less a wound than a permanent reminder. He remained stationed in Tyre, though not by choice. His fighting days, for the moment, were over. In a strange twist of fate, he had become something between an officer, a relic, and a confessor. Younger squires came to him with fears they couldn't voice elsewhere. Priests asked his advice before sermons. Merchants brought news from Europe and often sought his opinion about whether the church's indulgences were still being honored back home. He had become the grizzled face of the Crusade's failures. One morning, he stood overlooking the harbor, cane in hand, when a courier from Jerusalem arrived. The man wore the red and white cross of the Hospitallers and bore news sealed in wax. Saladin had returned to Damascus, wounded. The truce was holding, for now. Geoffrey did not cheer. Peace rarely lasted, and besides, what did peace mean to the dead? Behind him, Godric approached, squinting into the morning sun. "Have you ever been to Jerusalem?" the boy asked. Geoffrey nodded once. Years ago. Before Acre, Godric leaned on the stone railing beside him. They say it's the holiest place on earth. Did it feel like that to you? Jeffrey stared at the waves. It felt like every other city. Dirt, sweat, blood. The boy didn't respond for a while. Then, "Do you ever think about going home?" The question struck harder than expected. "I don't know if home still exists," Jeffrey said. "Even if it does, I doubt I'd recognize it. And it wouldn't recognize me." He glanced down at his hands, scarred, calloused, permanently curled from the sword's grip. The hands of a man who'd done things he would never confess to anyone but God. And God hadn't spoken in years. Later that week, a new threat emerged. Reports from inland villages told of a rogue band of black crosses, former crusaders turned mercenaries, disillusioned with both Pope and Sultan. They raided indiscriminately, worshipped a twisted fusion of Christian and pagan rites, and crucified both Christians and Muslims who resisted. The church labeled them heretics. The Templars called them traitors. But few were willing to pursue them, except Jeffrey. Not for glory, not for orders, because they reminded him of what he might have become. He led a small detachment, just 20 men. Among them, Godric insisted on riding. Against Jeffrey's advice, he was allowed. The garrison commander wanted to be rid of both of them. They headed eastward into the scorched valleys near Banyas. The trail was difficult, their supplies minimal. Heat and exhaustion stalked them at every turn. On the third night, they came across a village burned to the ground. Charred remains of both men and livestock littered the square. Someone had painted a crude cross on a ruined wall, in blood. One of the soldiers vomited. Jeffrey knelt by a corpse that had been left intact. A woman, young, perhaps a mother. Her arms were stretched in death like she was trying to shield someone. He whispered a short prayer, but didn't believe it would help. At dawn, they rode again. It took 4 days to find the heretics. They were encamped in a cave network above the Jordan River. Smoke from their fires gave them away. Jeffrey organized a nighttime assault. They descended on the camp silently. Arrows flew first, followed by steel. Jeffrey moved through the chaos with grim precision, dragging his bad leg, striking low and fast. Around him, the world became a flurry of movement and screams. Godric fought beside him, wild but effective. He had become a swordsman in his own right, honed by survival and pain. It wasn't a battle, it was a purge. Heretics didn't surrender. They laughed as they died. One of them, a woman painted in black ash, wearing Crusader chainmail, spat at Jeffrey before she was struck down. "You're no better," she rasped, just slower to admit it. When the fight ended, 15 heretics were dead, 2 Crusaders as well. Jeffrey took no prisoners. They burned the bodies the next morning. The stench lingered in their nostrils for days. On the ride back to Tyre, Jeffrey didn't speak, nor did Godric. But something had shifted. Upon their return, Jeffrey was summoned by the Bishop of Tyre. A portly man with jeweled rings and silk vestments, he greeted Jeffrey with hollow warmth. "You've done a service to Christendom," the bishop said, sipping imported wine. Jeffrey stared at the man. "I don't need thanks. Still, we are considering promoting you. The Order of the Holy Sepulchre has taken interest in your record." Jeffrey nearly laughed. "I've killed more Christians than I can count. Your order still sees that as service?" The bishop stiffened. "You killed heretics. That is not the same." Jeffrey turned without another word. He had no interest in more titles, more false honors. The crusade had nothing left to offer him but dust. The months crawled by. Geoffrey remained entire, but the city grew tense. Rumors spread of a new crusade being mustered in the west. King Philip's son sought to reclaim lost ground. Young knights trained in the yards with renewed urgency, Godric among them. But Geoffrey had ceased training with them. His leg pained him. His heart wasn't in it. Instead, he spent his time among the sick and dying, helping the hospitalers prepare bodies for burial. He found peace in the quiet, in the mundane rituals of cleaning wounds and changing linens. Here, at least, he could do no harm. One day, he sat beside an old man coughing blood, a pilgrim from Provence. The man smiled weakly. "Are you a priest?" "No." "You look like one." "I look like a corpse with a sword." The man chuckled until it became a cough. "Do you believe in salvation?" Geoffrey looked at the man's face, wrinkled, lined with pain, and wished he had an answer. "I believe in mercy," he said at last. Godric visited less and less. He trained with the newer recruits, hungry for a command of his own. He was beginning to resemble what Geoffrey once was, sharp, fast, noble in intention, and blind. One evening, Geoffrey found him polishing his blade by torchlight. "I heard your name mentioned by the Templars," Geoffrey said. Godric grinned. "They need officers for the next push, north to reclaim lost forts. You'll go?" "Of course. Isn't that why we're here?" Geoffrey sat beside him. "Number. That's why we were sent here, not why we stay." Godric frowned. "Then why do you stay?" Geoffrey looked out at the stars above the city walls. "Because someone has to remember, so the next ones might understand." Godric didn't reply. More months passed. The new crusade never came. Political tensions in Europe delayed its departure. Rumors swirled of an excommunication. Others claimed the Pope had died. None of it mattered entire. Geoffrey aged, slowly but visibly. His hair grayed, his shoulders slumped. The sword he once bore like a feather now seemed a millstone. He gave it to Godric without ceremony. "You'll need it more than me." The boy, now a man, took it solemnly. "I'll bring it back." Geoffrey didn't reply. Godric left the next morning with the Templar column, headed for the mountains north of Tripoli. Geoffrey stood on the wall, watching them disappear into the haze. He never saw Godric again. Years passed. Wars came and went. Kings rose and fell. The Holy Land remained unholy, soaked with the blood of too many nations. And Geoffrey? He stayed entire, limping, writing letters no one would read, watching new crusaders arrive with the same fire in their eyes, watching them leave broken or buried. He began keeping a journal, not of battles, but of truths. Things no one told you before you took the cross. He titled it, "Why You Wouldn't Want to Be Born a Crusader Knight," and he wrote, and wrote. And when he could no longer hold the quill, he spoke the words to a scribe, because if he couldn't change the world, maybe he could at least warn the next boy. The ink ran dry on Geoffrey's old quill the same day the sun rose overtired in blood-orange hues, burning against the horizon like a pyre. A subtle omen, perhaps, but Geoffrey did not believe in signs anymore. Not divine ones, anyway. Still, he felt something change in the air. The breeze off the sea had a different taste, saltier and sharper, like a blade unsheathed. He sat at the bench beneath the arched cloister, parchment before him, a half-written passage resting beneath his stiff fingers. The scribe, a Moorish convert named Amin, who barely spoke Latin, sat waiting patiently across from him. Geoffrey closed his eyes, searching his thoughts for what he had meant to say next. "There is no victory here," he murmured at last. "Only longer defeats." Amin dutifully dipped his pen and etched the words into the parchment. Geoffrey exhaled heavily. "Where did we leave off yesterday?" Amin flipped to the last sheet. "You spoke of the siege outside Homs and the fire pits." Geoffrey winced. "Ah, the scent of cooking men." He pinched the bridge of his nose. "There's a memory." Amin looked up. "Should we continue?" "No," Geoffrey said. "Today I want to remember something before all this." He rubbed the stubble on his chin and leaned back on the bench. "Before the cross. Before Acre. Before they strapped armor onto my bones like it meant something. I was a farmer's son. You believe that?" Amin nodded. "I believe most men began humbly. God lifts some and drops others." Geoffrey smiled without humor. "Or we jump and pretend we were pushed." In the coming days, a new group arrived by ship. 40 knights from Castile, young and eager, loud with their southern tongues and polished armor. They bore letters of passage from Rome and carried wooden chests filled with silver. Fresh Crusaders. One of them, a broad-shouldered man named Rodrigo de Villaclara, made it his mission to provoke Geoffrey. He called him the Beggar Knight, mocked his limp, and questioned why a man who did not ride to war should wear a sword belt at all. Geoffrey ignored him at first. But when Rodrigo spat near Amin's feet and called him a Saracen dog, Geoffrey responded. In the training yard, with half the garrison watching, Geoffrey picked up a wooden sword and faced Rodrigo with nothing but his cane in the other hand. Rodrigo sneered. "You'll break like a twig, old man." Geoffrey said nothing. The fight lasted seconds. Geoffrey baited Rodrigo's swing, let him overreach, and brought the hilt of his cane down across the knight's collarbone with a crack that echoed. Rodrigo collapsed, gasping. Geoffrey stood over him, cane pressed to the man's neck. "Every man dies," Geoffrey said, "but not every fool learns." After that, the new knights kept their distance. That night, Amin said, "You should not have fought. He could have killed you." "He could have tried," Geoffrey replied. "Why risk it? You are no longer young." Geoffrey looked at the stars. "Because some things you have to fight for, even when your bones say no. Not for glory, not for land, but to remind others there is still a line." Meanwhile, rumors began filtering down the coast from Antioch. Entire companies of Crusaders had vanished in the mountains. Some blamed bandits. Others whispered of a new cult, men and women garbed in white, claiming to be redeemers, preaching that Christ had returned in secret and that the Vatican was a lie. Geoffrey read the intercepted letters. The cult called itself the Reclaimed Flame. They did not simply kill, they converted. Crusaders, Hospitallers, even some Templars had defected. The Grand Master in Acre demanded action. In Tyre, Geoffrey was summoned once more, this time not by a bishop or a noble, but by Lady Melisende. Melisende of Tripoli, daughter of a French baron and a Syrian mother, was the unofficial power behind Tyre. Her authority was never spoken of in councils, but everyone knew no decision passed without her nod. Geoffrey had met her once before, years ago, after the siege of Acre. She had provided bandages and fruit for the wounded. She had looked younger then. Now she wore a long blue robe, embroidered with gold thread. Her face was regal, but not untouched by sorrow. "Sir Geoffrey," she greeted, rising from her carved seat beneath the olive tree in her courtyard. "It is said you remember what others forget." I remember enough, Geoffrey said. Then you'll know why I asked you here. He said nothing. She motioned to a map. The reclaimed flame is spreading, and unlike the black crosses, they do not die easily. They believe they are immortal. Everyone believes that, Geoffrey said, right until the knife finds the soft part. She allowed herself a tight smile. I want you to find them, track them, understand them, and if possible, destroy them. Geoffrey's eyes darkened. And why me? Because you're not blinded by ideals anymore, she said, and because you know what it is to lose faith. Geoffrey stared at the flickering lantern nearby. Its light danced on the folds of her robe. I'll go, he said, but not alone. She nodded. Take whoever you need. By the next sunrise, Geoffrey rode north with a strange company. Amin, the scribe, who refused to stay behind despite Geoffrey's urging. Renaud, a mute swordsman whose tongue had been cut out by Saracen raiders years ago and who spoke through signs and violence. Alric, a jaded Templar expelled from the order for questioning its Grand Master and whose chains still rattled from his former imprisonment. And Isabella, a Syrian healer who claimed she had seen the reclaimed flame up close and had scars to prove it. They moved slowly, following only rumor and whispers. In one village, they found a church desecrated, crosses overturned, icons melted down, and written in ash on the altar, "The true flame does not burn." In another, a young crusader had been nailed to a tree, not in mockery, but reverently, arms crossed over his chest, eyes open and full of what looked like peace. They chose this, Isabella whispered. They say pain frees the soul. One night, deep in the hills, they came upon a survivor, a boy barely 15, dehydrated and delirious. He had been with the reclaimed flame procession but escaped before the final rite. Geoffrey knelt beside him, giving him water. Tell me what they do, he urged. What they want? The boy's eyes rolled toward him. They want to purify the world. They say Christ walks again, but not as a man. What then? The boy smiled weakly. As fire. He died before dawn. In the weeks that followed, the trail led further into the desert. More signs, more strange followers. They found rings of stones, small fires that never seemed to extinguish, and bones arranged in star patterns. And then, one morning, they saw the flame itself. A line of figures in white, walking barefoot across the dunes, singing, chanting in a language Geoffrey could not place. A man at the center wore a golden mask shaped like a sunburst. They did not flee. They welcomed Geoffrey's company, invited him to see. He declined. They did not stop him from leaving. It was Amin who said what Geoffrey would not. They're not mad. They're certain, and that's worse. By the time they returned to Tyre, a month had passed. Renaud was dead, burned alive during a skirmish near Mount Lebanon. Alric had vanished. Isabella had stopped speaking. Only Geoffrey and Amin remained. They reported to Lady Melisande. What did you learn? She asked. Geoffrey looked her in the eye. That the crusade is already lost. Not to the Saracens, not to disease, but to certainty. Every man who is sure he's right is willing to burn the world. She said nothing. Back in his quarters, Geoffrey sat down and opened the journal once more. Amin waited, quill ready. Geoffrey whispered the next line. There are worse things than dying for a lie. One of them is living long enough to know you did. Amin hesitated. That may be the first time I've heard you speak of yourself. Geoffrey smiled. It won't be the last. The skies above Tyre turned to steel grey the day a rider arrived from the north, dust-smeared and near death. He brought neither letter nor relic, only a brand burned into his chest, a sunburst with a slit down the center, the mark of the reclaimed flame. He collapsed outside the city gates. Geoffrey was summoned within the hour. By the time he reached the infirmary, the man was barely breathing. The mark on his chest festered, the edges blackened. Geoffrey stared down at him, while Sister Honora bathed the man's brow with vinegar water. "Who found him?" Geoffrey asked. "A merchant caravan," Honora replied. "Near the ruins of Apamea. Said he walked out of the hills like a ghost." The man stirred, his eyes fluttering open. Geoffrey leaned closer. "Do you remember your name?" The man's lips cracked. "Brother, Samuel." Geoffrey stiffened. That name had appeared in one of the reclaimed flames' chants. "Samuel, who walks between fire and flesh." "You led them?" Geoffrey asked. Samuel's head twitched. "Number I was them. I burned for him. I was flame. What do you want now?" The man's gaze focused for a moment. "To warn you, he is becoming. He no longer needs us." Geoffrey frowned. "Who?" Samuel's mouth opened, but his voice came as a whisper. "The fire walks." He died moments later. Geoffrey didn't sleep that night. Instead, he returned to the parapet overlooking the sea. Tyre's torches burned in pools of flickering orange along the battlements. Far below, the waves hissed against the rock. Amin joined him just before dawn. "You believe him?" the scribe asked. "I believe he believed it," Geoffrey said. "That may be enough." Geoffrey said nothing for a long time. Then, "Do you think it's possible for a lie to become real?" "If enough people follow it," Amin considered. "It already has. That's how every kingdom starts. Every god. Every war." Geoffrey closed his eyes. "Then we've already lost." In the weeks that followed, something changed in the city. More signs of the reclaimed flame began appearing, subtle at first. A Crusader knight gone missing. A candle left burning upside down on a chapel altar. A whisper in the market. "There is another gospel." Then came the fire. It began in the slums beyond the merchant quarter. Dozens of homes went up in a sudden inferno, unnatural and fast. The flames moved as if guided, not by wind, but will. Geoffrey and Amin were among the first to arrive. Screams rang out as black smoke curled into the sky. Geoffrey ordered buckets of seawater hauled by the dozen, but the fire resisted. It danced back from the dousing, flickering sideways, splitting and recombining like a thing alive. One of the men watching dropped his pail and whispered, "It's him." Geoffrey turned on him. "Number, it's just flame." But part of him wondered. In the aftermath, the city's bishop declared martial law. The reclaimed flame was now officially a heresy punishable by burning. Irony, Geoffrey thought, considering they wanted to burn. He convened a secret council with Melisande, Amin, and a few trusted voices. Among them, Helena, a nun who claimed to have infiltrated the cult and lived among them for weeks. "They believe the fire is a form of divine rebirth," she explained. "They call it transcension. They do not fear death. They believe they're shedding their flesh." "Like snakes," Geoffrey said. "Like saints," she corrected. "Their Messiah isn't a man. It's an idea, passed through heat, born of pain." "Blasphemy," muttered one of the younger knights. Helena didn't argue. "But powerful blasphemy." Melisande turned to Geoffrey. "Can it be stopped?" "No," he said, "but it can be contained." They began hunting cult cells inside the city. Each arrest brought more revelations and more questions. One convert was a Templar cook who had secretly fed powdered ash into the order's wine. Another was a hospitaller surgeon who would stitch strange symbols into wounded men's backs while they slept. The reclaimed flame wasn't an army. It was a virus, and it was spreading. Geoffrey slept in short, uneasy intervals, his journal filled with darker passages. Hell isn't beneath us. It's the part of heaven that cracked. If God is fire, and a fire is mindless, then so is God. I was not born a knight. I was broken into one. Then came the letter. Delivered by a rider under cover of darkness, it was sealed in wax that smelled faintly of myrrh. Inside, written in clean Latin, "We remember you, Geoffrey of Tyre. You walked the valley of knives. You saw the true smoke. Come to us. There will be no fear." There was no signature, only a crude drawing of the sunburst symbol, this time shaped into an eye. Geoffrey crumpled the letter and threw it into the brazier, but the fire flared unnaturally high. He left Tyre the next morning, not on official order, not with a retinue. Only Amin rode with him. They followed no road, only signs, burned tree rings, carvings on old walls, whispers in villages of night processions bearing no torches. North, always north. Near Latakia, they came upon a monastery long abandoned. Inside, they found the reclaimed flame, but not as an army, as a choir. Men and women, clothed in white ash and linen, chanted in a ruined chapel with no roof. The sky opened above them, thunderless but thick with static. They didn't resist, didn't run, only watched. One of them stepped forward. It was Alric, the Templar who had vanished. He smiled. "You came?" Geoffrey stepped forward, hand on the hilt of his sword. "I want to understand," he said. "Why?" Alric's smile widened. "Because the crusade is a wheel, and the flame is the end of the turning. You can stop. You can rest." "I don't want rest," Geoffrey growled. "I want truth." Alric nodded. "Then step into the fire." He pointed behind him. A ring of coals burned red at the back of the chapel. Armin put a hand on Geoffrey's arm. Geoffrey stared at the flames for a long time. Then, slowly, he stepped away. Alric did not follow. They returned to Tyre in silence. Geoffrey resumed writing. His newest pages were no longer just stories. They were warnings to future crusaders, to anyone who believed war was sacred, to anyone who thought God wore armor. He added a new title to his journal, "Not because of the Saracens," and beneath it, "But because of us." By the middle of summer, the flies had returned, not the kind that gathered around the latrines or hung lazily over horse dung in the courtyard, but the black swarms, the kind that moved with a collective will. Amin was the first to notice. "They don't buzz," he whispered, crouching near the edge of the garden wall. "They hover, like they're watching." Geoffrey knelt beside him. Atop the basil and wild sage sat a tight, shifting cloud of insects, not moving randomly, pacing, pulsing. He reached for his dagger and flung it through the swarm. The insects burst apart, then quickly reformed into a new, denser knot, just out of reach. "Messengers," Geoffrey muttered, "or omens." "Either way," said Amin, "they carry rot." In the days following the swarm's appearance, 3 priests fell ill in the cathedral quarter. Each claimed visions of fire licking from their fingertips and dreams of a cathedral made from living wood, where Christ hung upside down and laughed with eyes of molten gold. Melisande ordered the priests confined. They tore out their own tongues before sunset. Sister Helena, who now oversaw the infirmary, brought Geoffrey a torn scrap one of the priests had etched into the floor with his own nails before he died. Geoffrey stared at the runes. They weren't Latin, not Arabic, nor Greek, but he recognized them. He had seen the same symbols in a ruined fort north of Homs, scratched into stone centuries ago by soldiers long forgotten. Pagan? Pre-Christian? He had no answer, only this thought repeated in his head. This did not start with us. Amin began recording what he called the Second Gospels, the scattered utterings and final ravings of those touched by the reclaimed flame. A priest, a knight, a woman who walked into the harbor chanting about a crucible under the sea. Geoffrey didn't like what he was seeing in the scribe. He was writing faster now, obsessively. Less sleep, more candle stubs burned down to wax puddles. Amin, Geoffrey warned, you don't need to understand it. The scribe's eyes were rimmed red. If we don't understand it, it will consume us. It already is. They rode again, this time south toward Ascalon, where reports of a burning tree had emerged. The branches were said to flicker with tongues of gold, yet the bark remained untouched. Locals spoke of voices emanating from its roots. Geoffrey found it just before dusk, and it was exactly as described. A single olive tree, alight but not consumed. The flames danced silently, cool and fragrant like incense. A child approached it, reached out. Geoffrey grabbed the boy's wrist just in time. Don't, he said. That's not for you. The boy only stared into the branches, mouth parted, like listening to a lullaby. They left the town the next morning, but Geoffrey knew they hadn't left the fire behind. It had seen them. It knew them. Melisande met them in Jerusalem. She had traveled under disguise, unescorted. Tyre is compromised, she said without ceremony. Not by fire, but by silence. Too many people now refuse to speak about what they've seen. She handed Geoffrey a leather-bound ledger. It was light, too light. Inside, only one entry. I dreamed of Christ wearing no face. When I woke, my mirror was empty. That's the last record of Bishop Theodoric, she said. He vanished from his chambers 2 nights ago. No sign of struggle. Geoffrey turned the page. Nothing. It's unraveling, he muttered. The faith, the order, the meaning of all this. Melisande said nothing for a moment. Then, do you believe we can stop it? No, Geoffrey said. But I believe we can record it. Back in Jerusalem, Amin began hearing whispers from the walls. At first, Geoffrey thought it was simple exhaustion. But the scribe described the same voice every night. Do not fear fire. It only burns the skin. The soul is what must be melted. Geoffrey took Amin to Helena. The nun examined him, prayed over him, burned sage and myrrh. But the voice returned. Amin said it now dictated his dreams. I see cities that never existed, he said. Pyramids made of ash, crosses without nails, a river of blood running backward. Geoffrey stayed awake that night, watching the scribe. He saw Amin sit up at dawn and begin writing in a language neither of them knew. That week, the sky over Jerusalem turned a dull, livid orange for 3 days. No fire, no storm, just color. The people said nothing. Geoffrey heard no street vendors, no bells from churches. The whole city held its breath as if God were walking through it unseen. When the light finally faded, a black stain remained across the dome of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. No one could wash it off. One friar tried to burn it away. He vanished inside the building. Only his rosary was found, molten into the shape of a sunburst. Geoffrey began carrying 2 books with him at all times now. His personal journal a growing compendium of flame testimonies, compiled by Amin and annotated by Helena. He titled the second one, The Fire That Prays. They made 3 copies, one for Melisande, one buried in a locked chest in Jerusalem, and one hidden beneath an abandoned monastery in the hills east of Hebron. Geoffrey did not expect all 3 to survive. That winter, the snow in the hills came down black. Geoffrey touched it with his bare hand. It was cold, normal, but when it melted, it left no water, only soot. It's ash, Amin whispered, falling from a fire we haven't seen yet. Geoffrey looked west, not toward the Saracens, not toward Rome, but toward the sea. At night now, he dreamed not of war or blood, or the screams of men crushed beneath siege towers. He dreamed of burning libraries, of children singing in foreign tongues, of a throne made of melted helmets. He saw himself kneeling before it, and behind the throne, the sun itself shining through a hole where God's face should be. The cold didn't come in gusts anymore. It settled. It sat. Geoffrey noticed it most in the corners of old churches, where shadows lingered even at noon. He had grown used to the scent of wax and oil and damp parchment. But now, a new smell crept into every cloister and hall. Jar. The crisp, brittle odor of something burned, but long ago. Memory smoke. No fire. Just the trace of one. Amin said the city had started to remember things it never saw. Geoffrey didn't ask what he meant. He had begun to feel it too. A door closing, though none had opened. A chant echoing from walls too thick to carry sound. And then there were the mirrors. They had once been rare, expensive things, Venetian, most of them, or polished bronze. But one by one, they began to go blank. Not shattered, not clouded, just empty, like the glass had forgotten how to reflect. The first time Geoffrey saw it, he reached up to touch his face. Nothing. Amin tested it by holding a torch in front of one. The flame had no reflection. This has gone beyond madness, the scribe said. Even dreams have logic. This doesn't. Helena disagreed. It has ritual, she said, and ritual is older than reason. Melisande returned from Antioch with strange news. Entire villages vanished, she said. Not burned, not raided, gone. She brought with her a map. At its center, a red circle had been drawn. They say the sun doesn't rise there anymore, she told Geoffrey. Birds turn mid-flight, wolves gather in daylight, and the air tastes like copper. And yet no army marches, Geoffrey asked. None that we can see. He tapped the circle with one finger. Then we ride around it. They headed for the Golan Hills, where an old Maronite monastery had reportedly discovered a buried vault, a pre-Crusade relic chamber untouched for centuries. The monks refused to open it, claiming the seals had begun to weep oil. Helena insisted they go. When they arrived, only 2 monks remained. The others had walked into the desert 3 nights before, following smoke that rose from the ground. The vault was beneath the chapel, sealed in ancient cedar and lead. Carvings of wingless angels covered the entrance, each with mouth sewn shut. They broke the seal. Inside, 3 stone chairs facing each other and a brazier that lit itself the moment they entered. Geoffrey watched the flame. It was white, silent, no heat. Amin spoke softly. This was here before Christ. No one disagreed. They left the vault sealed once more, but Geoffrey knew it didn't matter. The knowledge was out now. That night, Geoffrey dreamt of the First Crusade. He was there again, at Ma'arat al-Numan, in the winter of 1098. The snow had crusted over blood and bone. He remembered the silence after the walls fell. But in the dream, There were no screams, just rows and rows of Crusaders standing motionless, staring at a great tree in the center of the town square. From its branches hung dozens of burning hearts, still beating. He woke to the scent of ash. Amin was already at his desk. "New pages?" Jeffrey asked. Amin didn't look up. "They're not mine," he whispered. "I just hold the pen." By now, it was no longer clear who commanded the city. The Pope's banners still hung. Knights still wore crosses. Bishops still gave sermons. But none of it mattered. People obeyed silence more than law now. They burned no incense. They rang no bells. They spoke less, prayed more. And all their prayers were to light, not the sun, not God, just light. In Acre, a fisherman dragged up a stone tablet from the harbor floor. It was covered in the same sunburst eye symbol etched so deep it had gouged the rock. A local priest tried to break it. The hammer shattered. The priest began to scream. He screamed for 3 days, even after his tongue had split in half. On the 4th day, he stopped, smiled, then set himself on fire. Jeffrey no longer rode without a veil, not for disease, but because he could feel eyes on his skin, not people's eyes, other eyes. Like the world itself had grown a pair and begun watching its own disease. He spoke to Amin about it one night. "Do you think this is punishment?" he asked. "For the Crusades? For Jerusalem?" Amin, who had stopped shaving and now looked like a starved prophet, shook his head. "Number punishment implies guilt. This feels older, like we were always going to arrive here. Destiny? Design." By spring, the animals had changed. Dogs barked at firelight. Horses refused to walk near certain wells. Birds migrated in circles, never leaving the city. One cat, an old thing with one eye, followed Jeffrey for weeks. It wouldn't eat, wouldn't purr, just sat at the foot of his bed every night and watched. When it finally died, Jeffrey buried it. Its eyes remained open. More towns fell silent. Betsan, Nablus, Asuf. When scouts were sent, they found walls intact, gates unbroken, but no people. Tables still set, candles melted, bread half cut, like the moment of life had been paused or taken. No signs of struggle, no blood, only ash, always ash, and in the center of every city, a crude altar, a brazier, a bowl of soot, and in every bowl, a single scorched feather. Amin's dreams turned prophetic. He spoke in riddles, drew symbols, recited lines from books that didn't exist. At one point, Jeffrey asked him, "Who are you writing for?" Amin paused, eyes glassy. "Those who come after the fire." They had reached a point now where Jeffrey no longer questioned his fear. He wore it like armor, the same way he had once worn the cross, not as protection, but as identity. He no longer thought of the crusade as a war. It was a pilgrimage into decay, and he was the chronicler of its final chapters. But not its end, not yet. The last coherent conversation Jeffrey had with Amin occurred beneath the stone arches of the Tower of David. Rain whispered against the battlements, soft as breath. The scribe had taken to sitting cross-legged in the highest chamber, surrounded by pages filled edge to edge in twisting blackened script. "I think I've found it," Amin whispered, fingers smudged with ink and blood alike. "Found what?" Jeffrey asked. "The original prayer, before Christ, before Torah, before flame." He didn't look up from his pages. Jeffrey crouched. "You mean the source?" Amin nodded. "The language of first fire. It isn't meant to be spoken. It's meant to be remembered." Jeffrey watched as Amin dipped his quill again, then used it to mark the center of his own forehead. Not a cross, A spiral. That night, Amin walked naked into the Church of the Ascension. He passed the guards unnoticed. His footsteps made no sound on the marble floor. He stopped beneath the dome and chanted for 9 hours. Geoffrey was there for 6 of them. By the end, his fingernails were cracked from gripping his sword hilt too tightly. At dawn, Amin knelt and spoke a final phrase. The braziers went cold. Every candle in the district went out. Amin fell forward, arms outstretched, his breath steaming in the cold air. They buried him in salt. Melisande did not cry at the funeral. She stood at the head of the grave, eyes ringed in shadow, lips pressed into a thin line. "I believe he saw more than any of us," she said, "and I believe he paid the price." Geoffrey stared at the salt mound. He didn't just see it, he heard it, whatever it is. Helena placed a single feather on the grave. It wasn't burned. It was made of copper. No one asked where she had found it. Reports from Tyre grew stranger. The city was locked from within, its gates chained shut. The few traders allowed entry told of sermons delivered in darkness, lit only by a single flickering flame atop the altar. The bishop wore no mitre, only a crown of unburnt thorns. They spoke of a new blessing. "May the fire pass over you and leave your soul clean." Geoffrey read these reports in silence, then burned the pages. In the hills east of Tiberias, a knight rode to the command post blindfolded. He said his eyes had betrayed him after looking into a child's face and seeing a burning cathedral where his features should have been. Geoffrey asked what the child had said. The knight shook. He didn't speak. He sang, and the hymn bent the air. They placed the knight in a dark cell beneath the old prison chapel. By morning, he had carved dozens of spirals into the stone floor with his teeth. Helena began wearing veils of ash-colored linen. She no longer touched the sick. "I don't think it's a disease anymore," she told Geoffrey. "I think it's a conversion." "Into what?" She shrugged. "A different form of witness." "You mean belief?" "No," she said quietly. "I mean material, to be used, burned, folded into the next iteration of the world." There was a famine now, not of food, but of voice. People were afraid to speak above a whisper. Every word was treated like tinder. One old priest was whipped for reciting the Lord's Prayer aloud. He didn't protest. He thanked the lash. Geoffrey was in the courtyard when the man finally died. His mouth was full of coal dust. The last thing he said was, "He speaks in ember. You must learn to listen to burning." More and more children were born with black irises. Helena refused to examine them. "They are not sick," she said. "They are only different. We should not teach them our names." "What do we teach them?" Geoffrey asked. She turned. "How to survive the second sun." The moon cracked, or so it seemed. One night, a thin fracture appeared through its northern quadrant, visible even to the naked eye. A black line, curved like a sickle. People howled. Some fled into the desert. Others dropped to their knees and raised their arms to the sky. A boy in the lower quarter pointed up and whispered, "That's where the knife went in." No one knew what he meant. He refused to speak again for the rest of his life. At the citadel, Geoffrey now held no official rank, no command, no chapel. And yet, everyone deferred to him. He kept the ledger, the records, the fragments of prophecy and parchment. He had become, in time, the chronicler of twilight. Not because he was chosen, but because he had not run. He read aloud only once a week now, from the book of the fire that prays. Its pages were no longer in a single language. Some lines were Latin, some Arabic, some in the language Amin had spoken only in the dreams. He read them anyway, People came not to listen, but to witness the act, to prove that fire could still take the shape of words. The wind changed one evening. It blew west to east, the wrong direction, and with it came the sound of bells. Not iron bells, bone bells. They made no true chime, only a brittle knock, 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 like fingernails on coffin lids. They came from the sea. Geoffrey stood on the tower wall and watched the horizon. There, floating on black water, was a ship made of burnt wood. No sails, no oars, no wake, just drifting closer, slowly. Inside its hull, dimly, a single figure stood at the prow, tall, cloaked in ash-colored robes. No face, only a mouth, wider than a man's chest, open, waiting. He did not speak of the ship to anyone, not at first, but Melisande came to him in the dark. "I saw it too," she whispered. "I think it's a messenger. Or a mirror. To what?" She didn't answer. Helena began sealing windows. "We've taught the fire how to see," she said. No one questioned her. People began walking with their heads bowed. Some even bound their eyes in strips of black cloth. A few claimed they could now see more clearly. One said, "I see the city that waits inside this one. It has no doors, only flames shaped like doors." A woman gave birth to a child with lungs full of smoke. It coughed grey ash and spoke its first word before opening its eyes. The word was, "Return." The child died 7 minutes later. They buried it beneath the basilica. But in the weeks that followed, ash rose from that corner of the floor every morning, no matter how many times it was cleaned. The sky turned the color of clay. The sun dimmed. A second light appeared, pale gold, ringed in black. It did not move. It did not warm. It simply watched. Geoffrey now slept in the library. He dreamed in spirals. He no longer prayed. He no longer remembered the taste of bread. He no longer missed the England of his youth, or the lance, or the sword, or the sounds of steel on flesh. All of that was before. Now there was only the chronicle, only the fire, only the long march of flame through thought, faith, and flesh. A hymn hummed at the edge of his hearing, always just beyond language. It had no beginning. It had no refrain. Only one phrase repeated, buried deep in its center. You were not meant to wield the cross. You were meant to feed it. It was the month without names. Geoffrey stopped counting days. The sun did not rise or set. It simply dimmed and brightened as if in mourning for itself. The city was quieter than death. Even the crows, once omnipresent scavengers, had vanished. No wings beat in the sky. Only the fire remained. Not flame, not combustion, but the deeper fire. The fire behind things. The fire that watched. Geoffrey no longer pretended to be anything but a vessel. Not a knight, not a chronicler, just an open container into which visions were poured. One evening, a rider arrived from Caesarea. He was covered in soot, not blood, just black, greasy soot that flaked off like shedding skin. He was mute. His horse was blind. He carried no weapon, only a scroll. Helena opened it. Her face turned the color of ash. "What does it say?" Geoffrey asked. "It doesn't say anything," she whispered. "It's a map." He took it. The map was of the city, their city, but turned inside out. The streets curved into each other like ribs. The churches were empty holes. The walls had teeth. And at the center, where the Tower of David should have been, was a word written in the old flame language, kindling. The scroll, once unrolled, could not be rolled again. They tried to seal it in iron. The iron rusted. They tried to burn it. The flames turned cold. Eventually, they locked it in the crypt of the chapel, beneath 6 layers of stone. But Geoffrey could still feel it down there, throbbing, humming, hungry. Melisandre's eyes turned silver. No illness preceded it. One morning, she simply emerged from her chamber, and her irises had taken on the sheen of polished mercury. "Does it hurt?" Helena asked. Melisande shook her head. "Number. But I see things in reflections now. Not mine. Others. People I do not know. Places I do not recognize." "What kind of places?" "Places after." The birds returned, but not the same. They had feathers like coal dust and eyes like molten lead. They did not sing. Instead, they mimicked speech. At first, only a few words, then whole phrases. One bird landed near Geoffrey and said in Amin's exact voice, "The fire has remembered its name." Then it flew straight into the brazier and turned to ash mid-air. Geoffrey now sat in the hall where the Council of Knights had once met. The chairs were empty. The tapestries had been taken down. The cross above the mantel had melted into a shape not unlike a spiral. He placed the old ledger on the table and began writing without looking at the page. Helena entered. "Still transcribing?" "Yes," he said. "From whom?" He paused. "I don't think it's a whom anymore." She didn't ask what he meant. Reports came from the coastal villages. The sea no longer moved. No tides, no waves, just still black water like glass. Ships vanished without trace. One survivor claimed the horizon had curled in on itself like parchment set to fire. They called it the silence of the deep. Priests began preaching that the age of salt had ended. That flame was the new baptism. Helena disappeared for 4 days. When she returned, she carried with her a piece of stone covered in the spiral language. It glowed faintly, like embers under snow. "I found it in a collapsed cistern," she said, "buried under the old Roman roads." "What is it?" Geoffrey asked. "I think it's a memory." "Whose?" Helena only stared at him. On the 5th day, the stone began to hum. It pulsed in rhythm with their breathing. People found themselves unable to move too far from it. Even Melisande, once defiant, sat for hours beside it, not speaking. Geoffrey dreamed of it that night. In the dream, the stone opened like a flower, and from it rose a figure made entirely of white flame. No eyes, no face, just the outline of a man with a voice like smoke through reeds. "You lit the match when you first named him," it said. "Now he must burn his name away." Geoffrey woke choking on soot. More scrolls surfaced, from wells, from tree trunks, from the mouths of the dead. None could be deciphered. All carried the spiral. All burned to the touch, except when held by Geoffrey. They whispered. Quiet things. He stopped sleeping. One evening, Melisande stood at the top of the old wall, looking out toward the dark hills. Her silver eyes did not blink. "What do you see?" Geoffrey asked. She said nothing. He touched her arm. She turned. "There is a procession coming," she said. He followed her gaze. In the distance, lights, not torches, something colder, something steadier, like lanterns filled with starlight. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, moving slowly, coming closer. They prepared the city, not for war, but for witnessing. Geoffrey and Helena sealed the last of the churches. Melisande stood at the gate with a sword across her shoulders, humming a song no one else could hear. And the procession arrived. Figures walked in silence, tall, robed, faceless, cloaks woven from strands of charred wheat and black wool. Each carried a brazier on their back. From these braziers rose no smoke, only memory. Memory of the things that were, and the things that would replace them. They did not speak. They did not attack. They watched. One by one, They entered the city. People fell to their knees as they passed. One knight drew his blade. It turned to glass in his hand. That night, Geoffrey returned to the vault under the monastery, the one with the self-lighting brazier. He sat in one of the stone chairs and waited. Across from him, the other chairs filled, not with people, with presence. The brazier ignited. It whispered. The brazier spoke not in words, but in feeling. Geoffrey felt the weight of it in his chest, a throb like thunder held between ribs. The presence in the chairs around him did not move, yet the shadows they cast danced wildly across the walls, not cast by fire, cast against it. Then the brazier whispered a name, not his, not God's, a name without letters, without tongue, something carved into the marrow of the earth before breath or scripture. He tried to repeat it. His teeth shattered. Helena found him there, bleeding, barely conscious, slumped forward in the ash-ringed stone chair. She did not speak. She only placed her hand on his shoulder and hummed a lullaby that hadn't been sung in centuries. The hum stilled the fire for a while. The next morning, every bell tower rang in unison. No hands pulled their ropes. They rang of their own will. Not chimes, alarms. The procession figures had vanished, but they'd left behind their braziers, still smouldering in perfect circles on the flagstones of the courtyard. When Geoffrey stepped near one, he heard his own heartbeat, but reversed. Not lub-dub, but dub-lub. As if the fire had turned time inside out, as if it was remembering him before he existed. Melisande began sleeping in the stairwell of the old citadel tower. When asked why, she said the higher she slept, the more clearly she heard the city's dreams. "They are not nightmares," she said. "They are lessons. The stones are remembering how they were shaped. The air is remembering how it used to scream." She began sketching things with charcoal, long, thin-limbed creatures with spiral mouths and tongues shaped like rosary chains. Helena asked, "What are these?" Melisande, "We haven't met them yet." Pilgrims began arriving again, but not from Rome or France or even Antioch. They came from beneath, from old cisterns, from ruined temples, from sinkholes with steps leading down into ancient catacombs long since sealed. They wore tattered robes and belts of twine. Their skin glowed faintly, like dying embers. They would not speak, only kneel at certain corners of the city and tap their foreheads against the stones, again and again, until their skins split. One of them died after 3 days of fasting. When they burned the body, the smoke smelled like pine and parchment. Geoffrey inhaled it, and for 3 seconds remembered a cathedral that had never been built, yet stood at the center of a city that had not yet fallen. The river dried up, but water still came. Only upward. At dawn, the lowest stones of the southern aqueduct wept. Clear droplets rolled upward against gravity, gathering at its broken mouth. Helena touched the stream. Her lips curled in horror. "It's not water," she whispered. "It's memory." She was right. Those who drank from the aqueduct stopped speaking their native tongue. They spoke the spiral language, not fluently, only fragments, phrases. "The threshold is patient. We are the wick, not the fire. I remember being born under an unlit sun. Most didn't survive the week. Those who did were no longer afraid of anything." Geoffrey took to writing only at night. The chronicle grew thicker, more tangled, pages of charcoal sketches mixed with scorched parchment. He no longer used ink. He used the ash of the burnt scrolls. Each word written was a surrender. each sentence a requiem. Sometimes he caught himself writing in the spiral script, unaware. One phrase repeated itself over and over, even when he tried to stop. The fire that teaches is not kind. Melisande disappeared for 13 days. When she returned, she had a brand across her back, the same spiral that had marked Amin's brow. She said nothing about where she had gone. But from that day forward, birds refused to land near her. Mirrors, cracked in her presence, and the salt kept at her bedside never stayed in its dish. It spelled words as she slept. By then, it was no longer a city. It was a threshold, a place between. Priests no longer held mass. They recited memory instead, memory that did not belong to them, of crucifixions that occurred upside down, of sermons delivered to beasts with smoke for skin, of a Christ who wept fire and bled fog. No one left the city anymore, but more kept arriving. From above, one morning the sky split, not wide, just a hairline crack like a whisper across a sheet of stone. From it poured not light, but echo. People clutched their ears. Others began singing. Helena wept. Melisande stood beneath it and whispered, "It's open." Geoffrey asked, "What is?" She looked at him, silver eyes gleaming. The original wound. The Tower of David hummed now, constantly, a low resonant sound like the breath of a sleeping god. Geoffrey slept on the floor beside the chronicle. When he dreamed, it was always the same place. A city made entirely of bone and brass, a cathedral of smoke, and a single phrase written across the arch of its gate. The knight is not the hero. He is the warning. A group of children formed a choir. No one taught them. They sang at twilight, in perfect unison, without sheet or script. Their voices echoed too slowly, as if passing through a deeper medium. When asked the name of their hymn, they replied as one, "The Gospel of Cinders." One child vanished during the song, not walked away, vanished. The next night they sang with one voice missing. They did not acknowledge the loss, nor did they seem surprised. The second sun returned, this time lower. It hung just above the mount. It did not move. A woman walked up the slope to reach it. She didn't burn. She dissolved, petal by petal. Her voice echoed downward, carried by wind. "Tell the fire, I'm ready." And still the chronicle grew. Geoffrey no longer ate. He drank only from the stone that wept beneath the brazier. Its liquid did not nourish. It reminded. He felt himself thinning, not dying, just emptying, making room. For what, he dared not ask. Only that it would arrive soon. Then came the night when Helena stood in the chapel and said, "I've remembered something that hasn't happened yet." Geoffrey nodded. He understood. "What is it?" he asked. "A door." "Where?" "In the fire." "Where does it lead?" She smiled faintly. "Backwards." Helena left the chapel and did not return. She left no note, no trail, no witnesses, only the scent of scorched rosemary in her chamber and a thin line of soot drawn from her pillow to the door. The soot curved, spiraled, then ended at the foot of the brazier in the monastery's undercroft. When Geoffrey leaned close to that brazier, he heard her voice, not echoing, not crying, reciting, "I was never a knight, I was the hinge." The gates of the city no longer opened, but people entered. One man walked through the southern wall, not a break in the stone. He walked through it, as though it had always known him. He wore a single silver coin around his neck and carried a dead bird in a leather pouch. When asked his name, he said only, "I am the first who will not forget." He was blind, yet saw too much. On the 14th day after Helena's vanishing, the stars began to pulse. not flicker, pulse, in rhythm with the bells that now rang constantly, not by rope, not by hand, but by memory. The stars brightened in time with the bells, and then dimmed again and again, like a warning or a countdown. Melisande said, "They are blinking out." "Dying?" Geoffrey asked. "No," she said, turning away. The cathedral bell cracked, not from force, from within, its metal warped inward. The crack spiraled up its side like ivy made of absence. The sound it made was no longer a chime. It was a reminder, a tone that struck you not in the air, but in the bones. Some wept, others convulsed. One priest tore out his own tongue and replaced it with a strip of ash-covered vellum. No one stopped him. They watched and nodded. At the Tower of David, a light began to pour from the old arrow slits. Not golden, not flame. A dim, flickering light like fire seen through water. Geoffrey climbed the stairs with the chronicle under his arm. At the top, the stone floor was warm. The walls breathed. He placed the chronicle on the window ledge and opened it. Every page he had written was now blank. Only the spiral remained, faint and red, pulsing in the corner of each parchment leaf like a birthmark. He did not scream. He only said, "I am ready to begin again." Melisande knelt in the square, surrounded by silent figures wrapped in pale linen. They wore no shoes. Their feet bled into the stone. None had mouths, but they sang. The melody was bone-thin, wavering, like breath through a broken flute. Geoffrey could not understand the words, but Melisande repeated them after the song ended. Not flame, not smoke, not ash, but memory returned to spark. We burn because we promised, and now we make good. The last soldier in the garrison turned in his sword. He said nothing. He buried it in the courtyard beside the chapel, beneath the rose bushes that had stopped blooming when the river turned backward. No one thanked him. No one asked his name. He was only obeying. Night no longer fell. It unfolded, like a canopy being drawn back slowly, revealing not stars, but shapes, massive, slow-moving things drifting just beyond the sky. Not ships, not beasts, ideas. Ideas too big to fit inside skulls. Geoffrey could only think of them in colors. Silver gone blue, coal with memory, smoke between screams. He wrote them down as best he could, even as his hand trembled and blood ran from his nose. One child approached him, barefoot, holding a nail. "Is it time?" the child asked. Geoffrey did not know what time meant anymore, but he said, "Yes." The child smiled and handed him the nail. It was not iron. It was bone. And it was warm. Melisande stood beneath the tower with arms raised. She was reciting again. Only this time, it was not a hymn. It was a name that made the sky twitch. The tower groaned, stones wept, and the people began to gather without being called. Geoffrey looked into the brazier once more, not for warmth, not for vision, but for permission. He found none, only reflection, his own face, older than it should be, eyes gone dull, and behind it, Helena, watching. And then the spiral turned, not on paper, in the air, spinning, slowly, unseen but felt. The birds fell silent, the breath of the city held, and the bells stopped. The bells stopped, and in their silence came something worse. The recognition, not of a sound or a sign, but of the truth long buried beneath the stones and scrolls and sacred banners. Geoffrey stood alone at the city's heart. The chronicle clutched against his ribs, though he no longer remembered writing it. The wind moved without sound. Flags no longer flapped. Birds no longer circled. And the spiral above the city began to open. Not down, inward. A vortex not of clouds or flame, but of return. Melisande traced a spiral in salt across the chapel floor, and as she did, the pews around her began to rot, quietly, respectfully. Wood blackened and peeled like it had been asleep for centuries, and only now awoke to its age. Geoffrey stepped into the circle. The salt recoiled from his feet. Melisande looked up. Her eyes had no irises now, only dark centers ringed with faint gold. "It's here," she whispered. He nodded. They both knew what it meant. In the ruins of the old market square, the ground split, not with violence, but purpose. A fissure formed, perfectly round, rimmed with candle stubs and broken arrowheads. Inside it, a staircase, spiraling down. Geoffrey and Melisande stared at it, then at each other. "It wants us to choose," she said. "No," said Geoffrey. "It wants us to remember what we already chose." They descended together, each step echoing not with sound, but events. Each footfall sparked memories, memories neither of them lived, yet knew intimately. A girl buried beneath a tree made of rust. A knight kneeling before a flame that refused to die. A choir of faceless children holding silver keys. Melisande whispered, "This is not a descent." Geoffrey finished, "It's a resurfacing." At the bottom, a door, not wooden, not metal, woven, of breath, of bone-thin threads pulled from the mouths of the dead, and hanging in its center, a pendant, Helena's, still warm. They passed through. The world did not change. They did. Geoffrey opened his eyes and saw the city as it truly was. Not Jerusalem, not a holy land, a wound, a memory looped, braided, devoured, and reshaped. The walls did not keep anything out. They held everything in. The crusade was never about conquest. It was about containment. And the knights, himself included, were not warriors. They were seals, placed by God or something older to hold the spiral shut, until it opened again. He looked down at his hands. They were ash. Only the chronicle remained whole. It turned pages on its own now, revealing not ink but carvings pressed deep by unseen hands. The text moved, rearranged, reading him instead. Melisande stood behind him, lips moving without breath, repeating one phrase over and over. "We were never meant to remember, but memory is all that survives." The sky peeled back, not like a curtain, but like skin, and beneath it, mirrors. Infinite, rippling, cracked mirrors, each reflecting a different version of the same city. In one, the knights had won. In another, they had never come. In one, Geoffrey saw himself burned alive by his own hand. In another, he wore no face at all. But in all of them, one thing remained: the spiral, always turning, never closed. The children returned, not as themselves, not fully. They walked in patterns, perfect circles and triangles, stepping in silence, their shadows lengthening in reverse. Geoffrey watched them enter the Tower of David and vanish. Each one removed something from their mouth as they entered. A key, a tooth, a letter. Melisande wrote on the chapel wall with her own blood. Only 3 words, then collapsed. Geoffrey knelt beside her, saw the writing. "The fire waits." He carried her through the gate of the spiral's eye. There was no resistance. There was only one invitation. In the chamber beyond, Geoffrey found Helena, or what had become of her. Not flesh, not spirit, a shape, defined not by space, but story. She looked at him with eyes that glowed like candle wicks underwater. "Do you see now?" she asked. He opened his mouth. No voice came, only light. The chronicle turned its last page, but there were more words yet to write. And the fire? The fire hadn't even begun to teach. The fire spoke in colors now, not sound, not light. Color alone. a slow bleed of burnt ochre to sickly gold, to something darker. No shade Geoffrey had seen before, yet instantly recognized. It was the color of things left too long in silence, of promises unfulfilled, still echoing in the marrow of forgotten bones. Helena extended her hand toward the spiral. Geoffrey could not move. He felt the chronicle vibrate in his arms, growing heavier with each heartbeat, as if it had begun to collect not knowledge, but burden. Each word within it weighed as much as a name spoken in judgment. The chamber was round, too perfectly round to be man-made, or perhaps made by a man so long ago he no longer counted as one. The air inside it hummed with potential. Not yet a miracle, not yet a curse. Something before both. Helena spoke again. Every crusade ends where it began. Not in cities, not in conquest, but in questions. Geoffrey did not ask what question, because he already knew it. What if the enemy is us? The symbols along the wall pulsed in time with his thoughts. No longer scripture, not Latin, not Hebrew. The spiral tongue. He couldn't read it, but he felt its grammar. He knew when a sentence was a curse, when a paragraph described a wound, when a chapter screamed without making a sound. He placed his hand against the cold black stone and said the only word he remembered before all of this began. Mercy. The stone did not reply, but Helena wept. They found the others waiting beneath the sanctuary ruins, the old knights, or what remained of them. Some were hollow armor, filled only with incense smoke and ancient prayers. Others were bone wrapped in mold, blades still fused to their fingers. Amin stood among them, half a man now, eyes bright with something between grief and wisdom. "You've come too far," he said. Melisande stepped forward, steady now, her blood no longer wet on her skin. She whispered, "We had to." The bones in the courtyard rearranged themselves each night. No one moved them, no one dared. Each dawn they formed new shapes. A horse, a hand, a flame eating itself, and once a perfect spiral that curled in upon itself and then vanished. By midday, the bones lay flat again. Geoffrey stopped trying to map the pattern. It wasn't for him. The chronicle began to rewrite itself, even when closed. Words scratched onto the cover from the inside. They bled faint light, red like embers still hidden in wood. Melisande opened it once more. The first page now read, "You are not recording history. You are resurrecting it. The past is not behind you. It is beneath." The well behind the old granary boiled, not water, salt. It churned slowly, whispering things to any who dared listen. Some knights had. They were never seen again. One left behind his helm. Inside it, a piece of parchment with a single word scrolled 100 times. "Remember." Geoffrey stopped sleeping, not from fear, because sleep no longer offered rest, only return. Each dream was longer than the last, not in time, but in distance. He dreamed in spirals, descending into chambers that were never built, speaking with people he had not met yet, but already mourned. Helena would sometimes sit beside him as he stared into nothing. "It's happening," she'd whisper. "What is?" he would ask, but she would never answer. She didn't need to. One night, the city reversed, not in motion, in memory. Streets repaved themselves with older stones. Doors reappeared where they'd long been sealed. The Tower of David no longer leaned. It stood straight and angry. The sky spun. People cried out, but their mouths emitted nothing but scripture written backwards. And then the spiral in the heavens blinked. The second sun returned. Lower this time. So low it cast shadows from the ground upward. The people no longer feared it. They sang to it. Melisande led the hymns, her voice now layered with echoes not her own. The children followed her in perfect step, forming a circle as the sun froze above them. And from their circle rose a sound not born of throat or air, but remembrance, a sound of absolution no one asked for. A gate appeared, not built, acknowledged. It stood where the monastery ruins once were, between the broken altar and the weeping statue of Saint Bartholomew. It was made of bone, ash, and time. Geoffrey stepped toward it. The chronicle writhed in his arms, desperate, trying to leap free. But he held fast. Because he knew. Beyond this gate was not redemption. It was the answer. Geoffrey stepped through the gate. There was no pain. There was no moment of crossing. Just difference. Behind him, the memory of a city he no longer trusted. Ahead, something older than the earth itself, shaped like a cathedral carved into the bones of a whale. He stood inside it now, though there was no entry, no arch, no threshold, just awareness. The ground pulsed beneath his feet like the heartbeat of a buried god. And above, no ceiling, no sky, just spirals upon spirals of text, hovering in silence. Each one whispered in a tongue that burned his ears. Melisande followed. Her feet left no prints. The chronicle hovered now between them, its pages flipping by invisible hands. Geoffrey tried to speak, but found his mouth full of ink. He spat it out. It turned into a feather. The feather melted before it touched the ground. "It remembers us," Melisande said. "Why?" "Because we broke the forgetting." From the far end of the bone cathedral came a sound, a low groan, like a ship breaking against itself, like iron warping under truth. The choir of faceless children lined the hall, robes untouched by dust, hands clasped around nails and coins and thorns. At the center of their ring, a mirror. But the mirror reflected nothing, only want. Geoffrey approached it. It spoke in silence. "You are the gate. You are always the gate. Now choose what comes through." He reached out, but Helena appeared before him again. She was taller than before, or perhaps the room had shrunk to fit her. Her eyes shimmered like oil on water, layered with memory. She held a blade, not metal, something darker, a shard of night, a sliver of the void before time. "You know what this is," she said. "I do," he answered. He took it. It did not cut. It reminded. The blade pulled from him what words could not. Regret, folded like old letters. Pride, heavy and rusted. Duty, cracked like a dried riverbed. He laid each part on the altar of ash and salt. The mirror responded, "Good." The choir stepped back. The spiral on the floor began to burn, not with fire, with understanding. Geoffrey knelt and whispered a name. It was not his, but it was the one he had carried all this way. The flame took the chronicle. It did not burn. It translated. And as each page curled, its contents were lifted, not lost, but released. Spoken again by a voice with no throat, a voice made of consequence. Melisande turned to Geoffrey. "It's nearly here." "What is?" "The ending that never ends. The story we were inside of, but never writing." Outside, the sky cracked. Not thunder, not quake. A long, deliberate division. From it poured not stars, but ruins. Ruins of cities that had never existed, of temples too holy to be built, of prayers spoken before language. They fell gently, like ash. Each one whispered a different piece of the same sentence. Geoffrey listened. He did not understand the words, but he believed them. The children climbed into the sky, not flying, not lifted, just ascending, like steps that no one else could see. They carried no banners, No relics, only questions. Each footfall left behind a spark that hovered in place. When enough sparks gathered, they formed another spiral, this one vertical, reaching toward the cracked sky. It pulled the light into itself and bent the silence until it screamed. Geoffrey turned to Melisande. "I remember who I was before the war." "So do I," she said. "And it doesn't matter anymore, does it?" "No," she said, "because none of us were ever meant to stay ourselves." The last page of the chronicle shimmered back into view. Geoffrey did not write. He only placed his hand against it. It branded him, a mark not of ownership, but of invitation. The blade vanished. The altar cracked. The room filled with a wind that spoke in broken psalms. And then a door opened, not forward, inward. The door led inward, but inward was not a place. It was a when, a narrowing of everything he thought he understood, a compression of thought and memory into a chamber so tight it could not possibly exist. And yet, it did. Not behind him, not ahead, but inside the spiral itself. Geoffrey stepped through, but his body did not follow. Or perhaps it was his body that entered, and everything else. The man, the memories, the voice that once believed in honor was left behind. He stood in a space where there was no floor, no sky, only echoes. And those echoes were full of armor, suits upon suits of Crusader mail, some dented, others pristine. They hung in the air like meatless carcasses, arranged in a spiral that stretched both upward and down, as if gravity had ceased to obey geometry. Each helm turned toward him, each one breathed, and all at once they spoke. "Welcome, brother." He tried to run, but running here meant remembering faster, and Geoffrey had remembered enough. Still, the chamber spun. It did not move. It simply turned as though the world had been a coin all along, and someone had finally flipped it. And on the other side of that coin was not the Holy Land. It was before. In the before, the crusade had not yet begun. There were no papal orders, no steel, no banners, only children, many of them, whispering of fire under the earth, of a wheel that could not stop, of a God that had not yet been named. They spoke in riddles made of stone, carving their thoughts into walls long before language knew how to hold them. And in the center of them all, a spiral made of bone, teeth, and keys. Geoffrey saw it clearly now. It had never been about reclaiming holy ground. It had been about keeping something locked away. And the Crusaders? They were not saviors. They were jailers. Melisande followed him still. She had no eyes now, only burning spirals in their place. Her mouth, when it opened, was full of salt. "Do you see it yet?" she asked. Geoffrey did not answer. He didn't need to, because at the center of the spiral stood himself. But not as he was. This version of Geoffrey wore no armor. He wore light. He was the original, the first Crusader, not of Christendom, but of containment. And he held the blade of forgetting. It was then that Geoffrey understood. Every Crusader knight bore a soul already wounded by history, not because they fought, but because they were chosen to repeat. To carry the war not against enemy or heretic or heathen, but against the memory of what had truly happened beneath the holy hills. The spiral was not a path. It was a cell, and it needed to be guarded at all costs. But something had gone wrong. Someone had remembered. The mirror returned. Its frame was forged from the bone helms of fallen knights. Its glass was liquid, constantly shifting, reflecting what could have been, had the crusade never begun. Geoffrey looked inside. He saw peace. He saw forests undisturbed by war, villages growing into cities by the rhythm of harvest, instead of hunger. He saw himself, unblooded, a farmer, a father. Melisande beside him, laughing. But then, blackness. The mirror cracked, and the spiral behind it opened once more. Helena waited on the other side. She stood at the base of a monolith carved entirely from rosaries, each bead a name unspoken in prayer. "Come," she said. "Where?" "To the center." As they walked, the Crusader helms behind them whispered more loudly now. Each one repeated a name from history, names Geoffrey knew from songs and sermons. Godfrey, Bohemond, Baldwin, Raymond. But after each name came a sound, a lock turning. These were not just knights. They were seals. At the spiral's heart lay a chamber filled with feathers. Each feather was black as ink and stiff as stone. They covered the floor, the walls, the ceiling. Geoffrey knelt and picked one up. It screamed. Not a sound, a story. Of a knight who killed his own brother to keep the spiral closed. Of a bishop who burned every page of a forbidden book only to have the ashes write themselves anew. Of a child who walked backward into the sea, never to return. And in the center of the feathers, a door. Again, it was inward. Again, it did not open. It remembered. Geoffrey stepped through. His body remained. His mind did not. His thoughts scattered across timelines, realities, possibilities, like dandelion seeds caught in a breath of some great patient God. He saw the crusade unfold in thousands of ways. Each ended in ruin. Each ended in fire. Each ended in the spiral reopening. I floated now, not above land, not through time, but between versions. And in each, the spiral waited. The only constant, the only truth. It had never been closed, only slowed. Melisandre's voice followed him even here. "Do you still want to be a knight?" He didn't answer, because that question had stopped meaning anything long ago. The air was thicker now, less like mist and more like breath. The spiral pulsed around Geoffrey like a living thing, not structure but will, ancient and still somehow evolving, as if it was rewriting itself in reaction to his very presence. He no longer walked. He was carried not by hands, but by memory, by consequence. It wasn't time travel. It wasn't dream. It was the raw, vibrating experience of knowing too much all at once. He felt every crusade unspool across his skin like script written in flame and ash and screams. He heard Latin, Greek, Aramaic, forgotten dialects of prayers spoken backward through clenched teeth. And always, beneath it all, his own voice, years removed, reciting oaths he barely understood at the age of 14. His first sword, his first blood, his first lie in service of what he thought was truth. Geoffrey drifted toward a horizon he could not see, suspended in a void littered with fragments of every holy city, every battlefield, every church now reduced to echo. He passed through frozen moments like relics in glass. A boy kneeling before a flame-lit altar, fingers trembling on the hilt of a blade too big for his hand. A man buried to his waist in sand, laughing as he was stoned to death by shadows wearing bishop's mitres. A woman sharpening her tongue like a dagger while a red cross was stitched across her chest. Each tableau flickered, repeated, faded. Not visions, confessions. A platform emerged ahead, made from thousands of Crusader crosses arranged in concentric rings. It spun like a gear in an impossible machine, rising from the dark as if summoned by inevitability. At its center stood a throne carved of bone and chained books. Helena waited there, not older, not younger, just different, as though she'd shed every layer of identity until only intention remained. "Sit," she said. Geoffrey stood before the throne. "I'm not ready." No one is. That's why they break. He did not ask who they were. The answer was too close to the surface. Helena gestured, and the spiral around them convulsed once, like a great heart. Towers of script rose from the void, lines of untranslated prophecy that bent and twined around the broken sky. Each sentence ended in a blade. She whispered, "Every war leaves a scar. This one leaves a language." Geoffrey turned to her. His voice shook. "What does the spiral want?" "It doesn't want," she replied. "It remembers." Behind the throne, the space unfurled again, this time into a war room. A long table covered in wax-sealed scrolls, cracked relics, and maps drawn in blood. Every crusade plotted side by side, overlapping, intersecting like spider webs. The walls displayed heraldic symbols, not from Europe or the Holy Land, but from other iterations. Crusades no chronicle had ever recorded. In one, the Templars bore no faces. In another, the Saracens fought alongside angels with shattered wings. In all of them, one thing remained. The spiral must not be breached. And yet, here they were. Melisande entered behind him. She held the chronicle again, its pages now alive with movement, shifting, as though trying to escape their binding. The ink dripped off the parchment and formed shapes on the floor, sigils that danced like fire and hissed when stepped on. She set it on the table. Helena didn't look at it. She stared at Geoffrey. "You know why you were chosen." "I don't." "Yes," she said, "you do." He closed his eyes. He saw a child standing in the ruins of a monastery, a single spiral carved into his palm. A bishop whispering, "He will carry it further than we did." A bell tolled, not from above, from within the spiral. The light dimmed, the platform shook, and the throne began to dissolve. Helena didn't move. "You have to take it now," she said, "before it finds someone else." "Take what?" "This," she said, and pointed to the center of his chest. It wasn't a metaphor. The spiral was in him. He gasped as light poured out from between his ribs, curling into tendrils of memory, suffering, cycles, war made manifest. Melisande knelt and placed her hand on his shoulder. "We were never meant to win, only to contain." The spiral twisted. The war table exploded outward in hundreds of scrolls that spun through the air like birds. Each one flapped open mid-flight, revealing a different version of Geoffrey: knight, prisoner, deserter, martyr. Each page carried a lesson, each lesson a cost. He reached out. The nearest scroll sliced his hand open. The blood ran black. He did not flinch. Helena watched, nodded. "Then you are ready." The chamber turned again, and this time it became the battlefield. Not a battlefield. All of them. Layered atop one another. Antioch, Jerusalem, Hattin, Nicopolis, Acre, and places not on any map. Each soaked in the echo of prayer. Each haunted by the ghost of holy rage. And from their dust rose the figures of knights and kings and peasants alike, all marked by spirals burned into their armor, their flesh, their bones. Geoffrey stepped among them. None looked up. They were stuck in endless motion, fighting battles they could not win for gods who would not speak under banners long rotted. He shouted, "Stop!" They did not hear, because he had not yet taken the spiral fully. The throne reformed behind him, this time made of chainmail and ash and gilt. He sat. The spiral screamed, not in defiance, in relief, because the cycle had found its center once again. And Geoffrey, the boy who once prayed only to return home, had become the keeper of the gate. The scream of the spiral was not a sound. It was a collapse. History folded. Time inverted. Each crusade, each martyrdom, each relic buried and retrieved and burned and stolen, everything twisted into a braid of meaninglessness and necessity so tight it strangled the sky. The battlefield buckled under the weight of it. Geoffrey sat upon the throne, not a throne of glory or rule, but one of endless stewardship. He was not crowned. He was consumed. Above him, the sky cracked in a perfect spiral. Light poured down in coils, neither holy nor infernal, just true. Melisande and Helena stood on either side of him now, one holding the chronicle, the other holding a mirror that no longer reflected. "You've become it," Melisande whispered. "No," Geoffrey replied. "I always was." The battlefield flickered. Armies dissolved into cinders. Knights collapsed into their armor, their memories sucked back into the spiral like breath returning to the lungs of the dead. The spiral was resetting again, and again. But this time, Geoffrey stood inside it with full memory. The cycle began to resist him. It didn't want a conscious steward. It wanted a repeatable myth. So it tried to eject him. He bled. His skin cracked. But he held the throne. The chronicle opened itself. Pages ripped from its spine and circled around Geoffrey like vultures. Each page bore a forgotten version of him. Lives he might have lived, moments before he picked up the sword, before the oaths, before the pilgrimage. There he was, carving wood with his brother by a river, kissing a girl in the chapel alcove, lying awake as a child, afraid of thunder and of being left behind, and then screaming over the body of a fellow knight, run through by a Saracen spear, whipping a prisoner to extract names he didn't even need, burning down a village that had nothing to do with war. He saw all of himself, and it was too much. The spiral laughed, a soundless, crushing laughter that shattered geometry. The battlefield collapsed inward, dragging every knight, priest, monk, heretic, and child into a single black point. Geoffrey remained, because he was no longer within the spiral. He was the spiral. Helena reached for him, but her hand passed through. Melisande wept, but her tears hovered in air, forming letters. He was the last who remembered. And now he forgets. But Geoffrey did not forget. He refused to. He tore himself from the throne. Not physically, but symbolically. A break in pattern. A violation of the rule. The spiral shrieked and unraveled. Suddenly, he was on a mountain. He stood alone, covered in blood that wasn't his. The air was thick with ash. The sun was a gaping wound in the sky. Before him lay the city of Hierosolima. Not Jerusalem, not Al-Quds, not any version men had warred over, but the first one. The original template. A city not built, but spoken into existence. Its gates were open. From within, silence. He stepped forward. Inside, the streets were paved with eyes, living, blinking, silently watching. The buildings were made of bones that hummed with unspoken scripture. At the city's heart, a tower of flesh. The spiral had taken shape. It stood there, waiting, alive, breathing. Geoffrey approached. The tower opened like a wound. Inside, a child, not Melisande, not Helena, him 7 years old, holding a sword of paper and a crown of thorns. The child looked up. "Why did you come here?" the boy asked. Geoffrey fell to his knees. "I forgot why." "No," the boy said. "You remembered too much." A wind rose. It did not move the buildings. It moved the structure of the city itself. Streets bent upward. Doors turned into mouths. The tower lifted from its roots and hovered above Geoffrey like a judgment made flesh. Helena's voice echoed in the distance. "They will try to make you forget again." Melisandre's voice followed. Don't let them ride over you. The boy stood. Take it, he said, and held out the sword of paper. Geoffrey reached for it. The moment he touched it, he remembered. Every crusade was a binding. Every night, a sentence. Every prayer, an erasure. The spiral did not trap evil, it recycled guilt. The paper blade became iron in his grip. The city screamed. The eyes in the streets closed in agony. The tower convulsed. Geoffrey stood alone, sword in hand, at the center of the original sin. He whispered the words they had tried to burn. We were never holy. The city began to crumble, not from damage, from truth. Walls turned to dust. Songs unsang themselves. The spiral shrank, until it was no bigger than a coin in his palm. Geoffrey crushed it. Black light poured out. It did not blind him. It made him remember the world. The light faded slowly, dissolving into ash as it drifted over the horizon of unmade stone. Geoffrey stood alone in what remained of the first city, now reduced to outlines, smudges, forgotten architecture, the bones of belief. A faint wind stirred at his feet, lifting particles of what once passed for history. Each one shimmered briefly, then vanished as if absolved of its weight. The spiral was gone, or rather, contained, for now. But Geoffrey knew better than to think that meant peace. The spiral was never truly destroyed. It could only be misremembered, twisted, lost, rediscovered. His hands trembled, not from fear or exhaustion, but from displacement. He had returned from the spiral, but he had not come back whole. The sky overhead was fractured, no longer blue, but a gradient of bleeding manuscripts, each one bearing the names of cities and dates and bodies. They crossed and recrossed, forming a new constellatory map of crusades never declared. A record written not by kings, but by those buried under the stones of their legacies. Geoffrey turned. Melisandre stood at the threshold of what had once been a tower. Her armor was tarnished, covered in centuries of ash, but her eyes were sharp and watching him closely. "You saw it," she said. "I did more than see," Geoffrey replied, his voice hoarse. Melisandre stepped forward. "Then you know. The spiral doesn't end. It only forgets. It sleeps until the next boy picks up the blade. And it always will," Geoffrey said, "because we keep offering it names." They walked together in silence through the skeletal remains of the city. Arches collapsed inward like broken ribs. Fountains spilled no water, only dust that whispered when disturbed. Faces could still be seen on the stones, frozen in judgment or agony, mouths open as if crying out to a god long since disowned. "I was 10 when I was first shown the chronicle," Melisandre said softly as they stepped through the shattered gate. "I thought it was just stories," Geoffrey replied. "They are stories," she said. "That's why they matter. The spiral doesn't feed on power. It feeds on narrative, on ritual, on myth repeated until it forgets its own origin." Geoffrey stopped. "Myths like knights chosen by God. Myths like holy war," she agreed. A fire burned in the distant hills. Not flames, but a red shimmer in the grass moving against the wind. They both watched it in silence. The fire took shape as it moved, at first a serpent, then a lance, then a figure on horseback. Geoffrey narrowed his eyes. "Do you see it too?" Melisandre nodded. Every knight leaves behind a version of himself that never stopped fighting. That's what we're watching now. A ghost of a war that hasn't happened yet. The horseman reared against the horizon, faceless and hollow. His standard, a torn white flag painted with the red cross, flapped in a wind too old to remember its origin. "That's not a warning," Melisandre murmured. "That's a memory trying to be born again. The ground trembled underfoot, not with violence, but with grief. The soil of every battlefield had memory. Each drop of blood left behind a whisper, and now they were speaking all at once. Geoffrey closed his eyes. He heard prayers in Latin, desperate and defiant. He heard screams, sharp and short, then endless. He heard the clinking of coins paid for a child's silence. He heard the hiss of parchment as it burned in the churches set aflame during the Fourth Crusade. And beneath it all, he heard his own name, spoken by the dying, the betrayed, and the forgotten. He dropped to his knees. "Make it stop," he whispered. Melisande knelt beside him, touching the soil. "You broke the spiral's rhythm. It doesn't know what to do without you." In the distance, another city rose, not built, manifested, born from echo, constructed of belief and vengeance, spires carved from martyr bones, bells shaped like skulls, streets lit by the glow of judgment, a city of the next crusade. It stood not in this world, but beside it, overlapping, tied to it by story, prophecy, desperation. Helena stood at the gate, not calling him, not warning, just waiting. Melisande stood, sword drawn. "She's trying to rebind it," Geoffrey said, looking up. "She always was," Melisande replied. "And we let her." They walked toward the phantom city. As they neared, the air thickened, full of questions they could not answer. What makes a cause righteous? Who writes history? Why do the innocent bleed while the pious argue theology? When does redemption become complicity? Why are we still marching? At the gates, Helena waited, hood drawn over her brow. "You unbound it too early," she said without looking at Geoffrey. "It wasn't ready to be remembered." "No," Geoffrey said. "You weren't ready to let it go." Helena turned. "Do you think remembrance is freedom? Number, it's just another form of containment. What you've done, what you thought you did, was not salvation. It was exposure. Now the spiral has no center. It will spread." Melisande stepped forward. "Then we'll stop it before it finds a new one." Helena's expression twisted, something like pity, but older. "You don't stop stories. You inherit them." The sky cracked again. This time, light didn't pour through. Instead, it rained down soldiers, silent, faceless, falling like inverted meteors. Each one bore no sigil, only an identical spiral burned across their chest plates, and each one held a blade made of names. Geoffrey watched them land, not violently, just inevitably. One by one, they stood. No screams, no declarations, just the cold certainty of a tale resuming from the wrong page. Helena spread her arms. "Here they are, the children of the spiral, each one born from a version of you that chose war instead of remembrance." Melisande backed away. "How many are there?" Helena's smile faded. "As many as the lies you told yourself about what you were fighting for." Geoffrey stepped forward. He unstrapped the last piece of armor from his shoulder. It fell to the earth with the weight of a forgotten church bell. "No more kings," he said. "No more orders. No more relics." He drew the paper blade again, its edge flickering between languages, between eras. The children of the spiral took a step closer. Geoffrey planted the blade in the soil. The world shuddered, and the sky turned black. The sky didn't fall. It yielded. As the blade of paper sank into the soil, something ancient exhaled, like a long-held breath escaping from beneath the crust of history. The children of the spiral froze mid-step, their heads tilting upward toward a sky no longer bound by myth or judgment. The spiral that had once consumed Geoffrey, the one written in blood and calligraphy, in gospel and betrayal, began to unwind, not in fire, nor in war, but in quiet. The battlefield vanished. The phantom city flickered and crumbled like an ember snuffed by morning wind. One by one, the children of the spiral laid their swords at their feet. Without speaking, they bowed, not to Geoffrey, not to God, but to the choice he had made, the rejection of the story. Melisande watched as the paper blade dissolved into the earth, its final words unread, its final war unwaged. "You did it?" she said. "No," Geoffrey replied, staring into the distance where the sky met the land. "I stopped doing it. That was the only way." Helena approached them, no longer robed in priestly black, but in simple cloth, unadorned, unburdened. "The spiral will return someday," she said, "not as a threat, but as a truth. It always finds another form, another faith, another flag." Geoffrey nodded. "Then let someone else inherit it. I'm finished being someone else's myth." The wind shifted, and for the first time in centuries, it carried no sermons, no anthems, no screams, just silence, a clean page. Geoffrey turned from the place where the Crusades had ended, not with glory, not with vengeance, but with refusal. He walked into the unnamed horizon, his armor left behind like a snake's shed skin. Melisande followed. So did Helena. And so too did the countless stories that would never be told again.